On a cold December night in 2011, 13-year-old Erica Parsons seemed to disappear without a trace. Her parents told everyone she had gone to live with her biological grandmother, but something about their story didn't sit right. As investigators started asking questions, strange details began to surface. Mysteries involving bruises, missing time, and a plastic tote that couldn't be ignored. What really happened to Erica? And why did it take years for the truth to finally come out? This is the heartbreaking story of a girl who was silenced, but whose story refused to stay buried. Erica Lynn Parsons entered the world on February 28, 1998, born to Carolyn Parsons. At just 4 pounds, 7 ounces, Erica was a tiny but spirited baby. However, Carolyn faced a heartbreaking decision just days after Erica's birth. Financially unable to provide for her, Carolyn chose adoption, hoping to secure a brighter future for her daughter. Erica's biological father was absent, but Carolyn's former brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Sandy and Casey Parsons, stepped forward to adopt Erica. Carolyn had grown up in foster care and dreamed of something better for Erica. At just 4 weeks old, Erica joined the Parsons household, becoming part of their growing family. Officially, the adoption was finalized in 2000, though Sandy later claimed it happened in July rather than March. Casey Parsons fondly recounted those early days, saying, "We had her from 4 weeks old. By the time the adoption was finalized, she was calling us Mama and Daddy. We were the only parents she knew." Sandy and Casey had their own tumultuous history. They married sometime in the early 1990s and welcomed 3 biological children: Sandy Jr. in 1992, James in 1993, and Brooke in 1995. However, reports of domestic violence plagued their marriage. Sandy faced convictions for assaulting Casey in both 1994 and 1997, with court-ordered probation and community service. Despite this, they remained together, and their household grew with the addition of Erica. In 2001, Casey ventured into surrogacy, advertising herself online. She connected with Amy Miller, who hired her to carry a child. The arrangement began promisingly, but it quickly unraveled. After 6 weeks of pregnancy, Casey informed Amy of a miscarriage, only to cut off communication entirely. Later, Amy discovered evidence suggesting Casey had planned to keep the baby and had solicited money from other prospective adoptive parents. Legal threats and an FBI investigation forced Casey to relinquish the child after birth, raising serious questions about her motivations as a surrogate. Meanwhile, concerns about Erica's safety emerged. In 2002, social services began investigating allegations of abuse in the Parsons home, dating back to when Erica was just 2 years old. These suspicions added to the growing unease surrounding the family's treatment of their adopted daughter. The Department of Social Services launched an investigation into claims that Erica Parsons had been physically abused. A report alleged that Casey Parsons often carried a belt and used it to discipline Erica, leaving bruises. The report described marks on Erica's buttocks, the back of her leg, and the side of her face. It was also alleged that Erica refused to eat at times and that Casey had told her she didn't love her. When the Department of Social Services interviewed Casey, she denied the accusations of abuse. The investigator observed that Erica didn't appear to fear her parents and even sat on their laps without hesitation. No visible injuries, such as cuts or bruises, were found during the investigation. However, Erica was noted to be very small for her age, weighing just 41 pounds at 4 years old. To address the situation, a safety plan was implemented. Casey and Sandy Parsons agreed to use non-physical discipline methods, such as timeouts and groundings, and promised to provide a safe and stable home. On March 1, 2003, Casey traveled to Mexico for a medical procedure to reverse her tubal ligation. Later that year, in August, Erica enrolled at Boston Elementary School. Staff members remembered her as a shy but sweet child who smiled often and loved stickers. One teacher recalled how Erica would brush her bangs out of her eyes when she felt anxious and beam with pride when praised. In January 2004, Casey announced in an online post that she was pregnant, with a due date in September of that year. Around this time, another Department of Social Services complaint was filed, leading authorities to visit the Parsons home. This complaint claimed that Erica was frail, Casey no longer wanted her, and the parents had tried to give her away. Casey and Sandy denied using physical punishment, explaining that they raised their voices rather than hitting their children. They also stated that Erica had gastrointestinal issues that caused her to vomit food she didn't like, and denied threatening to withhold food or trying to give her away. When the Department of Social Services interviewed Erica alone, she described her discipline as timeouts or losing privileges. She said she might get spanked if she did something very bad. Erica appeared happy and well bonded with her adoptive parents, but investigators noted her small stature and frailty. The Department of Social Services required the Parsons to seek medical care if Erica's eating issues persisted or her development lagged. Despite this, neglect was substantiated, as Erica wasn't receiving the necessary medical attention. She was placed with an aunt who observed that Erica wore clothing meant for toddlers and was severely underweight. Living with her aunt, Erica began eating, playing, and gaining weight. She also confided that Casey and Sandy had physically disciplined her. However, the aunt didn't pursue legal custody, and after 8 months, Casey and Sandy regained custody of Erica. In 2004, Erica transferred to another elementary school, and on August 20th, Casey gave birth to a daughter. By 2005, Casey was pregnant again but reported an early miscarriage. She then started a business called Carolina Tail Waggers, which some sources described as a Chihuahua puppy mill, though details remain sparse. Later that year, Erica began homeschooling through the Parsons Christian Homeschool, a program Casey created at their home. Casey was listed as the chief administrator, and the state did not conduct background checks or require detailed progress reports from the school. Records show it enrolled 3 female students and 1 male, but there were no submissions of annual achievement test scores. From 2005 onward, information about Erica became scarce. Then, on July 30, 2013, Erica's then 19-year-old brother, Jamie Parsons, had a fight with his parents, whereupon he reported Erica missing. He described to officers that his parents had told him back in December 2011 that Erica had gone to visit her biological grandmother. Jamie explained that he had always felt the story seemed odd, especially since his father, Sandy, appeared unusually distressed when discussing Erica's absence. Jamie recounted his father looking pale and anxious, whiter than a piece of paper. Jamie's thoughts turned to the last time he saw Erica. She was 13 years old and had seemed unwell. Jamie remembered her looking gray and exhausted. She reportedly told Casey, "I can't breathe," but Casey dismissed her, telling her to get back in the corner. The next morning, Jamie woke up and Erica was gone. When he asked his parents about her, they claimed they had taken Erica to Asheville, North Carolina, to live with her biological grandmother, whom they said had reached out on Facebook to reconnect with her granddaughter. Jamie explained to authorities that this was the last he had heard about Erica. An investigation into Erica's disappearance was launched immediately. Detectives searched the Parsons home thoroughly, pulling up floorboards, probing the yard for signs of clandestine graves, and exploring every lead. Despite their efforts, Erica's whereabouts remained a mystery. Tips and reports flooded in, including alleged sightings of Erica along the roadside and calls from psychics, but none led to concrete answers. The FBI joined the search, offering rewards and generating national attention. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an age progression photo of Erica, transforming an image of her at age 9 into what she might look like at 15. These photos were widely circulated on billboards in hopes of gathering new leads. Authorities were determined not to fail Erica. Casey and Sandy claimed to investigators that they last saw Erica in December 2011 at a McDonald's in Mooresville, North Carolina. They stated they had taken Erica to meet her biological grandmother, who they alleged had contacted them on Facebook. According to the Parsons, they had traveled with one of their daughters to hand Erica over, but when investigators spoke with the girl, she denied being part of the trip. Investigators also found that Casey and Sandy could not provide any contact information for Erica's grandmother, not even the Facebook profile they claimed she had used to reach out. The lead investigator worked tirelessly to locate Erica's grandmother. He searched for individuals with her name in Asheville, but found no evidence of anyone connected to Erica. By August 2013, detectives publicly announced their belief that the story about Erica's grandmother was fabricated. They revealed that Sandy and Casey were not cooperating with the investigation. Around the same time, Erica's biological mother, Carolyn Parsons, flew from New Orleans to North Carolina to assist investigators. On the same day, Casey and Sandy appeared on the Dr. Phil show, claiming they believed Erica was not missing but was simply a rebellious teenager who no longer wanted to communicate with them. On the show, Casey stated that Erica's grandmother had told her that Erica refused to return home after staying with her for 2 months. Casey claimed she had tried to contact Erica's grandmother, but the phone number was no longer active. She interpreted this as Erica blocking their number. Despite their appearance on national television, Casey and Sandy maintained that they had been exemplary parents and insisted that Erica was safe. They denied any wrongdoing and blamed Erica's supposed disappearance on teenage rebellion. However, investigators remained skeptical as their story had glaring inconsistencies. In September 2013, Casey allowed media into her home, showing them Erica's former bedroom. By this point, the public and authorities were increasingly doubtful of Casey and Sandy's narrative. The search for Erica continued, with growing concerns about what may have happened to her after her last confirmed sighting in 2011. Detectives working on Erica Parsons' case had long suspected that Casey and Sandy Parsons were hiding critical information. Their instincts told them that separating the couple might lead to the truth, as Casey appeared to exert significant control over Sandy. However, keeping the two apart seemed nearly impossible until investigators uncovered a crucial mistake. The Parsons had continued collecting adoption assistance and food stamp benefits for Erica, even though she had not been in their custody for 2 years. These federal benefits, intended for Erica's care, became the key to involving the FBI. By 2014, Sandy and Casey Parsons were arrested on 76 counts of federal fraud and identity theft. The jury rejected Sandy's defense that Casey had masterminded the scheme and that he was unaware of the household finances. In March 2015, the couple received a combined sentence of 18 years in federal prison for their crimes. Despite the convictions, Erica remained missing. But in 2016, a major breakthrough came from Sandy Parsons himself. After more than 3 years of maintaining a web of lies, Sandy finally confessed. He admitted that Erica had died 5 years earlier at the age of 13. Investigators escorted Sandy to rural Chesterfield, South Carolina, an area tied to Casey's past. There, within minutes, Sandy pointed to the shallow grave where he and Casey had buried Erica. The detectives described Sandy's demeanor during the confession as somber and tearful. Sandy recounted the events leading up to Erica's death. In December 2011, he woke to Casey telling him that Erica had died. Casey had placed Erica's body in a plastic tote, where it remained for 2 days as the couple decided what to do. During that time, the family went about their lives, even attending a Christmas party. The couple eventually transported Erica's remains to the Chesterfield County site. Before burying her, they poured bleach over her body in an attempt to conceal evidence. To avoid detection, they removed the batteries from their phones during their trips to the burial location, once to dig the grave and a second time to dispose of Erica's remains. After nearly 5 years of concealment, Erica's body was finally recovered. Detective Moose personally oversaw the recovery of Erica's remains. He ensured her dignity was respected in death, something she had tragically been denied in life. Erica's remains were placed in a body bag, left unzipped so she would no longer be left in the dark. Detective Moose even added a stuffed animal to the bag as Erica's remains were transported back to Rowan County. Erica's discovery brought closure to a case that had haunted the community, and she was finally laid to rest with the love and care she deserved. As one investigator put it, Erica got more love from the community than she ever did from her adoptive family. Investigators suspected from the start that Casey Parsons orchestrated much of what had happened to Erica. They withheld the discovery of Erica's remains in 2016, hoping Casey would confess on her own. When questioned, Casey adamantly denied any involvement. "I've never been there," she stated, repeatedly dismissing any accusations of abuse or wrongdoing. Yet the truth was undeniable. Erica's remains told a haunting story of prolonged and systematic abuse. On October 14, 2016, Erica's remains were sent to the medical examiner, who spent 3 months meticulously examining her skeleton. The findings were devastating. Erica had endured severe and chronic abuse, with injuries ranging across her body, her face, torso, back, and limbs. She had multiple fractures, including broken bones in her shoulder blades and ribs that had partially healed before being broken again. Some of these injuries indicated long-term trauma, with new bone growth attempting to repair the damage. It was clear Erica had been subjected to relentless physical violence. Her brother Jamie Parsons confirmed the extent of the abuse during interviews. He recalled Erica being beaten regularly, often with belts or even remote controls. He also described friendly reminders, a cruel term Casey used for bending Erica's fingers back until they nearly touched her wrist. Erica suffered more than just physical violence. She was systematically starved, with food withheld for extended periods. Her growth was stunted so severely that her bones were the length expected for a 9-year-old, even though she was 13 at the time of her death. This combination of abuse and starvation was classified as torture, a level of cruelty rarely seen in child abuse cases. Family photos provided another window into Erica's suffering. While her siblings appeared happy and carefree in pictures, Erica was often captured standing apart, facing a corner. These images starkly symbolize the isolation and neglect she endured. The contrast between her siblings' joy and her mistreatment is profoundly heartbreaking. On June 18, 2017, Erica was finally laid to rest in a funeral organized and paid for by the Rowan County community. Hundreds attended, determined to give Erica the love and respect she never received in life. By February 20, 2018, Casey and Sandy Parsons were charged with first-degree murder, felony child abuse, and concealing Erica's death. Casey ultimately pled guilty on August 2, 2019, admitting to Erica's murder and child abuse. Her court statement was cold and detached, offering little insight into her motivations. She expressed regret but showed no genuine remorse. "I don't know why I did what I did," Casey claimed, adding, "I failed Erica horribly." Sandy also pled guilty to second-degree murder and child abuse, but his motivations were equally unclear. He reportedly believed he had negotiated a deal with the FBI to reduce his sentence, a claim investigators later denied. Both Casey and Sandy remain incarcerated, serving sentences for both fraud and Erica's murder. Casey, currently in a Florida prison, will begin her life sentence for murder in 2024. Sandy, held in New Jersey, is serving 33 to 43 years for Erica's death and will be eligible for parole at age 82. The Parsons' motives remain elusive, but their actions suggest a level of cruelty and neglect that defies comprehension. Erica was treated as less than human, subjected to unimaginable suffering at the hands of those who were supposed to protect her. As her community remembers her and seeks justice, the hope remains that policies and systems will improve to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Erica, now at peace, will not be forgotten. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On the morning of October 22, 2001, police got a call about a house on Middle Lane in East Hampton. This is one of the best addresses in town, the kind of street where every home costs millions and everyone knows everyone else's business, even if they pretend not to. When the cops arrived, they found something that didn't belong in this picture-perfect neighborhood. Ted Ammon, a 52-year-old Wall Street financier, was dead. And this wasn't some quiet passing in his sleep. This wasn't a heart attack or an accident. Someone had beaten him to death in his own home. The violence was so extreme, so brutal, that even experienced detectives who had seen plenty of crime scenes were shocked by what they found. This wasn't a random break-in gone wrong. Whoever did this didn't stumble into the wrong house looking for jewelry to steal. This was personal. Very, very personal. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Ted Ammon was a Wall Street guy through and through. He came up during the 1980s, that crazy era when corporate raiders were buying and selling entire companies like they were baseball cards. You might have heard of the RJR Nabisco deal, the one they made a movie about called Barbarians at the Gate. Well, Ted was connected to that world. He worked with firms like Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, learning from the masters how the biggest players made their fortunes. And Ted? He was good at it. Really, really good. He made millions, then tens of millions. He bought houses in Manhattan and the Hamptons. He collected art that would make museum curators jealous. He drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. But here's the thing about Ted. Money alone wasn't enough for him. He wanted to be somebody. He wanted respect, not just from other finance guys, but from the people who mattered in New York society. So he got involved in the arts. He became chairman of jazz at Lincoln Center, which is basically one of the most prestigious cultural positions you can have in New York City. Suddenly, Ted wasn't just a finance guy counting his money. He was at gallery openings and charity galas, rubbing shoulders with artists and celebrities and politicians. He had made it to the top. He was living the dream that most people can only imagine. In 1986, Ted married a woman named Generosa. She was beautiful, artistic, with this intense energy that drew people to her. But she'd had a rough start in life. Her mom died when she was young, and she grew up bouncing around without the kind of stability most kids take for granted. That kind of childhood leaves marks on a person. It makes you hungry for security. It makes you terrified of losing what you have. When Generosa met Ted, she finally had a chance at the secure, beautiful life she'd always wanted, and together, they built something that looked absolutely perfect from the outside. Their homes were featured in magazines. Their parties were legendary. They were that couple, you know? The ones everyone wants to be. The ones everyone envies. In 1992, they flew all the way to Ukraine and adopted twins, a boy named Greg and a girl named Alexa. Now the picture was complete. Successful husband, beautiful wife, adorable kids, houses that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. Ted and Generosa had it all. They had achieved the American dream in its most extravagant form. But here's what nobody tells you about fairy tales. They're not real. And behind the perfect photos and the magazine spreads, behind the glamorous parties and the designer clothes, Ted and Generosa's marriage was falling apart. The cracks were spreading. And soon, those cracks would become chasms that would swallow them both. By 2001, Ted and Generosa weren't just getting divorced. They were at war. And I don't mean they were arguing about who gets the good china. This was ugly. This was nasty. This was two people who had once promised to love each other forever, now trying to completely destroy each other. When you're dealing with tens of millions of dollars and two kids caught in the middle, that war can get really, really ugly. Every decision becomes a battle. Every conversation goes through lawyers. Every day is another chance to hurt the person you used to love. Ted handled the divorce the same way he handled everything else in his life, like a business deal. He hired the best lawyers money could buy. He had his accountants go through every number, every asset, every bank account. He approached the whole thing like a problem that could be solved with the right strategy and enough preparation. And honestly, he was confident. He'd won in business his whole life. Why would this be any different? Generosa saw things completely differently. For her, this wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet or legal strategies. This was about survival. Remember, she grew up without security. She'd spent years building this life, this identity as a society wife and mother. She had the houses, the parties, the social standing. And now Ted was threatening to take it all away from her. Her status, her money, her access to her kids. Everything she had worked for, everything she was, hung in the balance. She started to get paranoid. Maybe she had good reasons, maybe she didn't. But she became absolutely convinced that Ted was spying on her, tracking her every move, building a case to take the children away forever. She thought he had hidden cameras in the house. She thought he was monitoring her phone calls. She thought he had hired people to follow her everywhere she went. These fears consumed her. She couldn't think about anything else. They became her whole reality. And then, right in the middle of all this chaos, when Generosa was at her most vulnerable, a new man walked into her life. His name was Danny Pelosi, and he couldn't have been more different from Ted Ammon if he'd tried. Danny was an electrician from Long Island, not the fancy part of Long Island where the rich people live, the regular part where working people raise their families and worry about paying their bills. He was hired to do some renovation work on one of the Ammon properties, just another contractor in work boots and a tool belt showing up to fix the wiring. Danny was charming, funny, and completely out of place in the world of the Hamptons elite. He told jokes. He made people laugh. He had this way of making whoever he was talking to feel like the most important person in the room. And Generosa, who was feeling scared and alone and desperate, who was watching her marriage fall apart and her whole life crumble, fell for it. She fell hard. They started an affair. And what began as maybe just a distraction, just a way to feel something other than fear and anger, quickly became something more, something intense, something that would change everything. Danny moved fast, really, really fast. Before long, this electrician who used to show up in a beat-up work van was staying in mansions. He was driving luxury cars that cost more than he used to make in a year. He was wearing designer clothes and eating at fancy restaurants. The transformation was unbelievable. People noticed. Of course they noticed. In the Hamptons, everybody notices everything, even if they pretend they don't. Here was this working-class guy from the wrong side of Long Island suddenly living like a millionaire. People whispered, people gossiped, but Danny didn't seem to care. Neither did Generosa. They were in their own world. The prosecutors would later say that Danny saw an opportunity and grabbed it with both hands. A rich, vulnerable woman in the middle of a nasty divorce? A woman who stood to inherit a massive fortune if only her husband weren't in the picture? For a guy like Danny, it must have looked like winning the lottery. The only question was whether he'd be willing to do what it took to cash in. October 20th, 2001. A Saturday. Ted Ammon drove out to his house in East Hampton for the weekend, just like he'd done hundreds of times before. The divorce was almost finished. After months of fighting, months of lawyers and depositions and bitter negotiations, the end was finally in sight. In a few more days, maybe a week at most, the papers would be signed. He'd kept most of his money. He'd secured his right to see his kids. As far as Ted was concerned, he'd won. He probably felt pretty good that night. The nightmare was almost over. He could finally move on with his life, start fresh, put all the ugliness behind him. He had dinner. He watched some TV. He went to bed in his beautiful house in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in America. He had no idea it would be his last night alive. We'll never know exactly what happened in that house during the early hours of October 21st. The only person who knows for certain is the killer, and they're not talking. What we do know is that sometime that night or early the next morning, someone got inside, someone who knew the house, someone who knew how to get past the alarm system without triggering it, someone who came with a very specific purpose in mind. Ted Ammon was beaten to death. The attack was brutal, violent, and personal. This wasn't a quick killing. Whoever did this wanted Ted to suffer. They hit him again and again with some kind of blunt object, something heavy enough to do terrible damage. By the time it was over, Ted didn't stand a chance. The weapon was never found. Here's what made investigators immediately suspicious. There was no sign of forced entry, no smashed windows, no kicked-in doors, no broken locks. The alarm system had been dealt with by someone who knew how it worked, someone who had the codes or had figured them out. This wasn't some random burglar who got surprised by a homeowner. This was planned. This was calculated. And this was done by someone who had access to that house. Ted Ammon, the man who had spent his whole life in control, who had always found a way to win, who had always had the answers, had been completely powerless to stop whoever did this. All his money, all his success, all his careful planning, none of it mattered in the end. In his own home, in his own bedroom, he was just as vulnerable as anyone else. When the news broke, it was everywhere. A Wall Street millionaire murdered in his Hamptons mansion? Are you kidding? The tabloids went absolutely crazy. This had everything: money, murder, mystery. Everyone wanted to know who did it. And pretty quickly, people started looking at the obvious suspects, Generosa and her new boyfriend. But then Generosa did something that shocked absolutely everyone who was paying attention. 3 months after Ted was murdered, 3 months, the investigation was still going on. The police hadn't arrested anyone yet, but everyone knew they were looking hard at Generosa and Danny. Suspicion was swirling around them like a hurricane. And in the middle of all that, Generosa married Danny Pelosi. The electrician who'd been working on her house just a year earlier was now her husband. Let that sink in for a second. Her husband just got murdered in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. The cops are clearly looking at people close to her. Everyone suspects her boyfriend might have done it. And she marries him? 3 months later? It was either incredibly bold or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. But to the prosecutors building their case, this was basically a flashing neon sign. In their eyes, Generosa and Danny had conspired to kill Ted so they could have his money. And now, barely 3 months later, they were making it official. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Building a murder case takes time, especially when you don't have a smoking gun. The police had their suspicions about Danny Pelosi from the very beginning, but suspicions aren't enough to convict someone. You need evidence. You need a case that will hold up in court. And that takes patience. It took more than 2 years. In March 2004, police finally arrested Danny Pelosi and charged him with second-degree murder. The trial that followed would be one of the most talked-about cases in years. It was all over the news, all over the tabloids, all over the TV. Everyone had an opinion about what really happened. The case had everything people love in a true crime story: money, sex, class warfare. A working-class guy accused of killing a millionaire so he could steal his lifestyle. The courtroom was packed every single day. Reporters fought for seats. The newspapers couldn't print stories fast enough. The prosecution laid out their case piece by piece, like building a wall one brick at a time. They admitted right up front that they didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't have DNA evidence. They didn't have fingerprints placing Danny at the scene that night. What they had was something else. They had motive. Mountains of motive. Think about it from Danny's perspective, they told the jury. Here's a guy who's been working with his hands his whole life, scraping by, probably never imagining he'd live in anything fancier than a regular house in a regular neighborhood. And suddenly, because of his relationship with Generosa, he's living in mansions. He's driving cars that cost more than he used to make in a year. He's eating at restaurants where the bill for dinner is more than his old monthly rent. But there's a problem. If the divorce goes through the way it's supposed to, Generosa gets a settlement. A nice chunk of money, sure. Enough to live comfortably. but nothing compared to what she'd get if Ted died before the papers were signed. If Ted dies while they're still technically married, Generosa inherits everything: the houses, the art, the investments, all of it. And Danny, as her husband, gets to enjoy that fortune right alongside her. The math was simple. Ted alive meant a nice payout. Ted dead meant hitting the jackpot. The defense fought back hard. They were smart lawyers, and they knew exactly where the prosecution's case was weak. Where's the evidence, they kept asking. Where's the weapon? Where's the DNA? All you have is a theory, a story that sounds good, but doesn't actually prove anything. They argued that Danny was being prosecuted not because of what he did, but because of who he was. A working-class outsider who didn't fit in with the Hamptons crowd. An easy target. But the jury didn't buy it. After weeks of testimony, after hearing from dozens of witnesses, after looking at all the evidence from every angle, they came back with their verdict. In December 2004, they found Danny Pelosi guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The electrician who had dreamed of living like a king would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Danny has always said he didn't do it. From the day he was arrested to today, he's insisted he's innocent. In interviews from prison, he's pointed fingers at other people, including Generosa herself. He says he was set up, that the real killer is still walking around free. Maybe he's telling the truth, maybe he's not, but the jury heard all the evidence and made their decision. In the eyes of the law, Danny Pelosi murdered Ted Ammon for money, and he's paying for it with his freedom. Here's the thing about this story that really gets to me. There are no winners, not a single one. Everyone lost something. Some people lost everything. Generosa Ammon never saw Danny's trial. She never saw him get convicted. In August 2003, while Danny was still waiting to even be charged, she died of breast cancer. She was only 51 years old. Whatever secrets she had about that night in October 2001, whatever she knew or didn't know about what really happened, she took them to her grave. Her death made everything even messier, if you can believe it. Ted hadn't updated his will before he was killed. He probably figured he'd do it after the divorce was finalized, when he knew exactly what he had and who should get it. But he never got that chance. So when Generosa died, there was chaos. Lawyers fighting over money. Banks arguing about who controlled what. Legal battles that dragged on for years while the lawyers got rich and everyone else waited. And caught in the middle of all of it? Greg and Alexa, the twins. The kids who had been adopted from Ukraine when they were babies, brought to America with so much hope for their future. First, they lost their father to murder. Then they lost their mother to cancer. And then, while they were still trying to figure out how to deal with losing both parents, they had to watch as adults fought over who would raise them and who would control their money. These weren't characters in a TV show. They were real kids who lost both their parents before they were even teenagers. Everything that happened, the murder, the trial, the tabloid headlines, all of it, that was their lives. And they have to carry that weight every single day. Today, the Hamptons look exactly the same as they always did. The big houses are still there, hiding behind their hedges. Rich people still come out for the summer, throw their parties, drink their expensive wine, and believe they're safe behind their gates and alarm systems. Life goes on. The seasons change. New scandals replace old ones. The house where Ted Ammon died has been sold and fixed up. New owners trying to escape the shadow of what happened there. Trying to make it just another beautiful house on a beautiful street. But some shadows don't go away so easily. Some stains don't wash out. Danny Pelosi is still in prison today. He's eligible for parole eventually, but for now, He's serving his time, still telling anyone who'll listen that he didn't do it, still insisting he's innocent. Maybe someday he'll get out. Maybe he won't. The system has spoken. So, what are we supposed to take away from this story? What's the lesson here? Maybe it's that money can't protect you from everything. Ted Ammon had all the success anyone could want. He had the houses, the cars, the status, the beautiful family, everything that's supposed to make you happy and keep you safe. And none of it mattered when someone decided he had to die. Maybe it's that people are capable of terrible things when love and money get twisted up together, when desperation meets opportunity, when someone sees a chance to change their whole life and decides they're willing to do whatever it takes to grab it. Or maybe the lesson is simpler than that. Behind every headline, every sensational story, every true crime documentary you watch late at night, there are real people, real victims who had families and dreams and plans for the future, real children who have to grow up carrying wounds that might never fully heal. Ted Ammon's murder case is officially closed. A man was convicted and sent to prison. Justice, at least as the legal system defines it, was served. But the questions this case raises don't have easy answers. Questions about wealth and marriage, about love and betrayal, about what people will do when they think nobody is watching. In the end, paradise wasn't just shattered. It was revealed to be an illusion. The perfect life was never perfect. The safety was never real. And some prices, once paid, can never be undone. A warm Friday afternoon on the Ohio turnpike. A silver sedan sits motionless on the shoulder of the highway, hazard lights blinking rhythmically against the afternoon sun. Inside the car, an elderly woman in the back seat, frozen in shock. A wife gripping the steering wheel, her hands covered in blood. And in the passenger seat, a 69-year-old doctor with a single bullet wound to the head. The wife is screaming into her phone. Between sobs, she tells the 911 operator that a robber appeared out of nowhere. Short, dressed all in black. A mean, threatening voice. He demanded her husband's wallet. She heard a muffled pop, and then he vanished, speeding away in a black van that seemed to materialize and disappear like smoke. A random highway robbery. A senseless tragedy. A widow left to grieve. That's what everyone believed. That's what the evening news reported. That's what the community accepted as they gathered around the devastated wife to offer their condolences. But 30 miles back, at a service plaza in Portage County, a grainy surveillance camera had captured something strange. Something that didn't fit the widow's story at all. The footage showed Donna Munda, hours before she would dial 911, looking directly at a man parked across the lot. Just a glance? 2 seconds? Maybe 3? The kind of look you give someone you know, someone you're expecting to see. That glance would unravel everything. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British Edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Dr. Munda had spent 40 years building something. Not just a medical practice or a career, but a legacy that would outlast him. He came to America from India with a medical degree and not much else. Did his urology residency at Albert Einstein Medical Center in Philadelphia, learning American medicine while adjusting to a new country, a new culture, a new way of life. Then he settled in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, a small town in the western part of the state where he became the doctor everyone trusted. For decades, he worked at Sharon Regional Health System. Colleagues consistently used words like meticulous, dedicated, reliable. The kind of physician who remembered patients' names years after treating them. The kind who stayed late to answer questions. The kind who made you feel like you weren't just another appointment on a busy schedule. But it wasn't his medical career that truly defined him to his family. It was his wallet. That sounds crass, and I don't mean it that way. What I mean is that Munda fundamentally believed success was meant to be shared. Testimony from relatives at the trial painted a picture of a man who had essentially lifted his entire extended family out of poverty, one check at a time. Cousins needed tuition for college? Gulam? Nephew starting a small business and short on capital? Gulam? Someone in the family needed surgery they couldn't afford? Gulam would find a way to make it happen. He was the family's center of gravity. The person everyone turned to, the one who never said no. Every Friday, without exception, he made the hour-long drive to a mosque in Youngstown for prayers. It was as fixed in his weekly schedule as his rounds at the hospital. He didn't talk about his faith or wear it on his sleeve. He just practiced it, quietly, consistently, year after year. At home, though, things were different. More complicated. People who knew the household described a man who valued order above all else. The house had to be kept quiet during certain hours. Meals had to be served at specific times. Routines had to be followed precisely, without deviation. Some people called this discipline and structure. Others called it rigid control. Here's what I've noticed after years of covering these cases. We want victims to be perfect. It makes the story cleaner, the emotions simpler. But real people are complicated. Dr. Munda was generous to a fault with everyone outside his home, yet demanding and inflexible with those inside it. Both of those things were true. And understanding that complexity matters for what comes next, because it helps explain why his wife convinced herself she deserved something different. Donna Jean Munda was the kind of person people instinctively described as bubbly. Born in 1959 in Bradford, Pennsylvania, a small mountain town, she grew up, became a nurse, was good at her job. Colleagues remembered her as competent with patients, warm with coworkers. She remembered birthdays, left little handwritten jokes in the break room to make people smile. That's the version of Donna everyone knew. There was another version hiding underneath, one she kept hidden from almost everyone around her. In 1998, Donna's father died. Something broke inside her after that loss. Federal court documents show she started using fentanyl around this time, the prescription painkiller that was just another medication back then, long before it became the drug that would devastate America. She was also dealing with depression and chronic insomnia. She self-medicated to dull the grief and kept on smiling in public. People who testified about her later said there was a noticeable shift after her father passed. The bubbly Donna became withdrawn, harder to reach. She was fighting demons nobody knew about, medicating herself while desperately trying to maintain the facade. For 6 years, she held it together. Then in 2004, the facade cracked. She got caught stealing prescription painkillers from her employer and was fired immediately. For a nurse, that's not just losing a job. That's losing a professional identity, a career, everything you spent years training for. Donna checked into Gateway Rehabilitation Center to get clean and try to rebuild. That's where she met Damian Bradford. Bradford was in his early 30s, roughly 15 years younger than Donna. Small-time drug dealer from a completely different world than the one she inhabited. They sat in the same therapy circle, sharing their failures, their shame, their fragile hopes for something better. Rehab has a way of stripping away the barriers that normally separate people. The hedge fund manager and the homeless addict share the same room. The doctor's wife and the street dealer pour the same bad coffee. In that environment, something started between Donna and Damian that quickly went beyond mutual support in recovery. She started giving him things, not small tokens of affection, serious gifts, cash, lots of it, a car, an apartment, multiple cell phones so they could communicate secretly. Court testimony would later describe a relationship built as much on transactions as on genuine attraction. She had money and status. He had youth and attention. It was combustible from the very beginning. Back in Hermitage, Dr. Munda seemed completely oblivious. His wife had completed her rehabilitation program. She was supposed to be better now. Normal life was resuming its rhythm. He had no idea she was spending thousands on another man. No idea about the secret phones, the hidden meetings, the entire parallel life she was building alongside their marriage. Here's where the money comes in, and I want to break this down carefully because it's crucial to understanding everything that followed. The Mundas had a prenuptial agreement. If Donna divorced Ghulam, she would walk away with approximately $250,000 plus some shared assets. That's substantial. But it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to as a doctor's wife. And it certainly wasn't enough to keep funding an affair with a younger man who had expensive tastes. If Ghulam died while they were still legally married, the math changed dramatically. His estate was worth somewhere between $3 and $6 million. Here's a detail that stopped me cold when I was researching this case. According to what Bradford told investigators later, Ghulam actually offered Donna $1 million to walk away from the marriage. A clean break. No questions asked. $1 million free and clear. She said no. She told Bradford she wanted what she felt she deserved. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that word, deserved. It suggests something beyond greed. It suggests entitlement, resentment, the deep-seated feeling that life had somehow shortchanged her and someone owed her the difference. That one word explains more than any financial spreadsheet ever could. They didn't just talk about killing Ghulam Munda in abstract terms. They sat down and planned it, discussed scenarios, considered logistics. This wasn't a crime of passion building to an explosive moment. This was premeditated in the fullest sense of that word. The first idea was to attack Ghulam during his Friday mosque visits in Youngstown. Bradford would stake out the location, wait for the doctor to arrive alone, and make it look like a random robbery that turned violent. Week after week, he tried to find the right opportunity. Week after week, something went wrong. Too many witnesses, wrong timing, cars in the wrong places. The plan kept stalling out. Then came the trip to Toledo. Dr. Munda's nephew was buying a house in the Toledo area, and Ghulam wanted to see the property himself, give his opinion on the investment, help out with the decision, as he always did with family matters. Donna saw the opportunity immediately. The morning of May 13th, she met with Bradford and handed him a printed copy of their entire driving route, told him exactly where they would be and when, gave him her cell phone number so she could signal their progress along the way. Then she went home, helped her elderly mother Dorothy into the back seat of the car, and started the drive to Toledo with her husband beside her in the passenger seat. Behind them, at a careful distance, Bradford followed in his own vehicle. Throughout the trip, Donna sent text messages, not to friends checking in, not to family members coordinating schedules, to Bradford, quick updates on their location along the turnpike, signals letting him know exactly where they were in the route. They stopped at a service plaza in Portage County somewhere along the way. Bathroom break, maybe coffee from the vending machines. Dr. Munda had no reason to notice the man parked in a vehicle across the lot. Why would he? It was just another traveler at a rest stop. But Donna noticed him. The surveillance camera captured it, her gaze shifting to the side, finding Bradford's car, lingering for just a moment. A brief glance across the parking lot between two people who, according to the story she would later tell police, had never met before. That footage would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the entire case. Two people making eye contact who shouldn't have known each other existed. They got back on the turnpike. Another 30 minutes of driving into the late afternoon. Then Donna pulled the car onto the shoulder of the highway and stopped. Later, she would tell police she stopped because she was tired and wanted to switch drivers with her mother. Her mother Dorothy would give a different explanation entirely, saying she had a stomachache and asked Donna to pull over. The stories didn't match, but in the chaos and confusion of the immediate aftermath, investigators didn't focus on the discrepancy right away. A car pulled up behind them on the shoulder. A man got out and approached. Damian Bradford walked to the passenger side of the vehicle where Dr. Munda sat. He demanded the wallet, playing the role of a highway robber. Then he raised a 9mm handgun and fired a single shot into the doctor's head. 69 years old. 4 decades of practicing medicine. An entire extended family held together by his generosity and support. All of it ended on the shoulder of the Ohio Turnpike on a Friday afternoon in late spring, with his wife sitting inches away. Bradford ran back to his car and sped away, heading east on the turnpike. As he drove, he threw the wallet's contents out the window. Credit cards, driver's license, papers, all scattered across the median and shoulder for investigators to find scattered over the following days. Donna reached for her phone and called 911, and the performance of her life began. When Ohio State Highway Patrol troopers arrived at the scene, they found a woman covered in her husband's blood, apparently hysterical, barely able to form coherent sentences through her sobbing. She told them about the robber, short man, dressed head to toe in black, with a mean and threatening voice. He came out of nowhere, she said, demanded the wallet. She heard a muffled bang, and then he was gone, vanished in a black van before anyone could react. She said she hadn't noticed anyone following them during the drive. Couldn't describe the attacker's face in any useful detail. Her memory was foggy, traumatized, unreliable. She was just a victim, just a widow now. In the following days, Donna gave tearful interviews to local television stations. The community responded with an outpouring of sympathy. People who knew the Mundas gathered around the devastated widow to offer comfort and support. But certain details weren't adding up. The wallet, for instance. Donna claimed the robber took it and fled with it as he escaped. But surveillance footage from the service plaza clearly showed her holding her husband's wallet during their stop there. If the robber took the wallet during the crime, why did she have it in her hands hours earlier at the rest stop? Then there was something else that emerged later in the investigation, a detail that still disturbs me whenever I think about this case. According to testimony that came out at trial, Donna had actually wanted Bradford to shoot her during the attack. Just a flesh wound, she suggested. Something superficial. Something to make her story more believable, to cement her status as a victim rather than a suspect. Bradford refused to do it. Think about that for a moment. Even while planning her husband's murder, she was worried about the credibility of her performance afterward. Worried enough to ask for a bullet in her own body. That's how calculated every aspect of this scheme was. Investigator Judy Neal took over the case and started methodically pulling at every loose thread she could find. Turnpike records came first. Every vehicle that entered and exited the highway system was logged with precise timestamps. By painstakingly cross-referencing all the times and locations, investigators could identify cars that had traveled the same route as the Mundas on that Friday afternoon. One vehicle's timing matched too perfectly to be coincidence. Cell phone records came next. This is where Bradford made his biggest and most fatal mistake. His phone pinged off cell towers near the Munda home before the family even left that morning. Then it pinged towers along the turnpike as they drove, then at the service plaza, then near the location where the crime occurred. Digital breadcrumbs scattered the entire way, creating a clear trail of his movements throughout the day. But the real break in the case came from somewhere investigators hadn't expected. 6 days after the murder, a woman called the tip line. She gave her name as Charlene Farr. It didn't take long to determine her real identity. Charlene McFrazier, Damian Bradford's girlfriend. She knew about the affair with Donna, knew about all the expensive gifts, the apartment, the cars, the secret phones, and she knew, or at least strongly suspected, what Bradford had done for the doctor's wife. Jealousy? Maybe. Self-preservation? Probably. Revenge for being betrayed? Almost certainly. Whatever her exact reasons, that phone call brought investigators directly to Bradford's door with hard questions and harder evidence. Confronted with the cell tower data, the turnpike records, the surveillance footage from the service plaza, Bradford made a calculation of his own. He flipped. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he agreed to cooperate fully with prosecutors. He led investigators to the murder weapon, a 9mm handgun with the word "witness" stamped on its side, a detail that struck me as almost too symbolic. Ballistic testing confirmed it was the gun that killed Dr. Munda. And then Bradford told them everything. The failed mosque surveillance attempts, the route printout, the signal text during the drive, every single detail of how Donna Munda had orchestrated and directed her husband's execution. Donna Munda was indicted by a federal grand jury on August 16, 2006. The charges were severe: interstate stalking resulting in death, murder for hire, and firearms violations. The government announced they would seek the death penalty. The trial ran from June 18th through July 5, 2007. Inside that courtroom, two completely different narratives competed for the jury's belief. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. They showed the text messages exchanged between Donna and Bradford during the drive. They displayed the printed route she had given him. They played the surveillance footage from the service plaza, freezing on that damning moment when Donna looked directly at her accomplice across the parking lot. They brought Bradford himself to the stand to testify about the planning, the failed mosque surveillance attempts, the conversations about money and what Donna felt she deserved. They traced every gift, every secret phone, every financial transaction between the illicit lovers. The defense painted a very different picture. They presented Donna as a woman fundamentally damaged by grief and addiction, emotionally dependent and fragile, possibly manipulated by a younger man who saw a vulnerable, wealthy woman and recognized an opportunity for himself. During the penalty phase, psychologists testified about dependent personality disorder as a mitigating factor. Friends and family members took the stand to describe the bubbly, generous woman they thought they had known before everything fell apart. What struck me reading through the trial coverage was the genuine shock from Donna's own family. They testified about the cheerful woman they knew. They hadn't known about the severity of her drug problem. They didn't know about the job loss. They had no idea whatsoever about the boyfriend. She had hidden entire chapters of her life from the people who loved her most. On July 6, 2007, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. The penalty phase followed. The government was still seeking death. But after hearing testimony about Donna's childhood, her losses, her mental health struggles, the same jury that had convicted her chose life imprisonment instead of execution. On September 21, 2007, Donna Munda was formally sentenced to life in federal prison. Years later, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals would review her case thoroughly and affirm all convictions. Was the sentence appropriate? I honestly don't know. Life in prison is one of the severest punishments our system can impose. But a man who dedicated his life to helping others was executed on the side of a highway because his wife decided she deserved his money more than he deserved to live. There's no sentence that truly balances that equation. There's a postscript to this case that I think reveals something important about who these people really were. Bradford cooperated with prosecutors, testified against Donna, served his time. He was eventually released from federal prison around December 2020. Less than 2 years later, he was back in the headlines. In 2022, he was involved in a violent confrontation at a convenience store that ended with a Pennsylvania state trooper getting shot in the leg. Bradford was convicted and sentenced to 36.5 to 73 years in state prison. Then he received an additional 10 years in federal prison for violating his supervised release, to be served consecutively after the state sentence. His own defense lawyers acknowledged during sentencing proceedings that this effectively means he will die behind bars. People have asked me whether Bradford was a predator who targeted a wealthy, vulnerable woman, or a pawn who got manipulated into violence by someone more calculating than himself. I think the truth is messier than either of those narratives. Two deeply damaged people found each other at rock bottom, fed each other's worst impulses, and built a deadly fantasy together. She provided the resources, the motivation, and the target. He provided the violence. Neither one of them was an innocent party in this tragedy. Dr. Ghulam Munda's family still talks about his generosity, the relatives he helped through school, the patients who remember him with gratitude decades after he treated them, the way he showed up reliably every single Friday at the mosque in Youngstown. His murder wasn't random. It wasn't senseless in the way that word usually gets applied to violence. It was deliberate, calculated, planned over months by the person who slept next to him every night and shared his home. What haunts me about this case isn't the violence itself, it's that moment at the service plaza, Donna's eyes finding Bradford across the parking lot, a glance that said, "Soon, now." She knew exactly what was coming in the next hour, had planned every step meticulously. And she still went through with it, still got back in the car with her husband and mother, still drove another 30 minutes knowing what would happen when they stopped. The prosecution called it greed. The defense called it dependency and mental illness. I think it was something harder to name and more disturbing to contemplate. A toxic combination of resentment, entitlement, and the unshakable belief that she deserved a different life, and someone owed her the difference. Donna Munda is currently in federal custody, serving her life sentence. Damian Bradford will almost certainly die in prison as well. Charlene McFrazier, the girlfriend whose jealous phone call cracked the case open, pleaded guilty to lying to investigators. And in western Pennsylvania, there's a family that's still missing the man who held them all together. This case reminded me of something I covered a few months ago, a similar pattern where a spouse convinced a lover to do what they couldn't bring themselves to do alone. There's something about that dynamic I keep seeing in these murder-for-hire cases. The person with the motive finding someone else willing to pull the trigger. It's cowardice dressed up as partnership. If this one got under your skin the way it got under mine, leave me a comment. I always want to know what you think, especially on cases like this one where the motives are so tangled up in money, resentment, and twisted ideas about what we deserve from life. Until next time. Dr. Mary Yoder sits down for lunch at her chiropractic office in Whitesboro, New York. She's laughing with her staff, discussing weekend plans, completely unaware that within 48 hours she'll be dead. The cause? A poison so rare that most doctors have never seen a case of it. A substance that doesn't just kill, it makes organs fail one by one while victims remain conscious, aware of what's happening to them, but powerless to stop it. But here's where this story becomes truly disturbing. The poison didn't come from a stranger. It came from inside. Someone Mary knew, someone she trusted, someone who had sat at family dinners and worked alongside her every single day, allegedly spent months planning the perfect murder. And they almost got away with it. Almost. Because what started as a mysterious death became one of the most shocking murder investigations in New York history. A case involving falsified documents, planted evidence, anonymous letters pointing fingers at the wrong person, and a legal twist in 2025 that left everyone asking the same question. Did justice prevail, or did a killer walk free? Hello, I'm Michael, and this is a new case from Unreal True Crime. To understand what was lost on July 22, 2015, you need to understand who Mary Yoder was. She wasn't born into privilege. Mary Louise Baker came into the world on March 18, 1955, in Buffalo, New York, to parents Norma and Arthur Baker. Nothing about her early years suggested tragedy would one day consume her life. Instead, Mary grew up with a calling, a desire to help people, to heal them, to make a tangible difference in their daily pain and suffering. When Mary married Bill Yoder, they didn't just build a marriage, they built a mission. In 1987, they opened chiropractic family care in Whitesboro, a small practice that would grow into something much more significant over the next 28 years. This wasn't some sterile medical office where patients were processed like numbers. People came to see Mary specifically. They trusted her not just with their spinal adjustments, but with their stories, their fears, their families. One former patient would later recall how Mary once brought a treatment table to their home to help their bedridden mother. She didn't have to do that. It wasn't billable. But that's who Mary was, the kind of doctor who showed up. By 2015, Mary and Bill had 3 children, daughters Liana and Tamarin, and a son named Adam. The practice was thriving. Mary was 60 years old, healthy, active, and by every measure living the life she'd worked so hard to create. She had no idea that someone in her immediate orbit was allegedly preparing to destroy it all. It's Monday morning, July 20th, 2015. Mary walks into chiropractic family care the same way she has thousands of times before. She greets the receptionist, checks the appointment schedule, mentally prepares for the day ahead. Her first patients arrive, regulars, people she's treated for years. The conversations flow easily. Back pain, neck stiffness, the usual complaints that Mary knows how to address. Around lunchtime, Mary eats with her staff. It's casual, routine, unremarkable in every way. Nobody notices anything unusual about the food. Nobody sees anything suspicious. It's just lunch. But sometime during that meal or shortly after, something enters Mary's system. Something that will kill her within 48 hours. The symptoms start gradually. A little stomach discomfort. Maybe something she ate disagreed with her. Mary being Mary, she pushes through it. She has afternoon appointments scheduled. People are counting on her. She's not the type to cancel over a minor stomach ache. Except it's not minor. By mid-afternoon, Mary is visibly struggling. The discomfort has escalated into something more serious. Her staff notices. They're concerned, but Mary insists she can finish the day. She's wrong. Eventually, someone makes the call. Mary needs to go to the hospital. At Faxton St. Luke's Healthcare Center, the emergency room doctors run tests. Mary's symptoms are troubling, but initially, there's optimism. This is a healthy 60-year-old woman with no significant medical history. Whatever this is, they'll identify it and treat it. The family is told she'll probably be discharged soon. They're catastrophically wrong. Instead of stabilizing, Mary begins to crash. Her organs start failing, kidneys, liver, one system after another shutting down. The doctors are baffled. They're throwing everything they have at this, but Mary's body is being destroyed from the inside out by something they can't identify. On July 22nd, just 48 hours after that unremarkable lunch, Mary Louise Yoder is pronounced dead. The official cause is listed as multi-organ failure, but that's describing what happened, not why. Her family stands in that hospital hallway, devastated and confused, asking the same question over and over. How does a perfectly healthy woman just die like this? Most families, after losing someone suddenly, eventually accept the medical explanation, however unsatisfying it might be. Tragic, inexplicable deaths happen. Sometimes healthy people just die, and there's no good reason why. But Mary's family can't accept that. Something feels fundamentally wrong about this entire situation. A vibrant, healthy 60-year-old woman collapses at work and dies 2 days later with no pre-existing conditions, no genetic predisposition, no warning signs. By October 2015, 3 months after Mary's death, the family makes a decision. They contact the Oneida County Sheriff's Office. They want this investigated, not as a medical mystery, but as something potentially criminal. Sheriff Robert McKeown takes the case seriously. His investigators start asking questions, pulling medical records, interviewing staff at the chiropractic office. And they make a request that will change everything. They ask the medical examiner to take another look. In December 2015, the medical examiner's office makes it official. Mary Yoder's death is being ruled a homicide. The cause of death is colchicine toxicity. For anyone unfamiliar with the drug, colchicine is an anti-inflammatory medication primarily prescribed for gout. In controlled prescription doses, it reduces pain and inflammation. But there's virtually no margin for error with this drug. The difference between a therapeutic dose and a lethal dose is dangerously small. Too much colchicine, and the body begins shutting down system by system, exactly the way Mary's did. Lieutenant Robert Nelson from the sheriff's office emphasizes to reporters that this isn't just any colchicine. They're dealing with research-grade material. This is the pure chemical compound, not the regulated pills you'd get from a pharmacy. Someone acquired this deliberately, and someone with access to Mary used it to kill her. The manhunt begins. Investigators are working every angle. They're looking at Mary's life, her relationships, anyone who might have had access to her food or drink on that fatal day. They're checking financial records, searching for motive. It's painstaking work with no clear suspects. And then, an envelope arrives at the medical examiner's office. The letter inside is anonymous, but the content is explosive. It names Mary's son, Adam Yoder, as the person responsible for his mother's death. But this isn't just a vague accusation. The letter provides specific, verifiable information. Look under the passenger seat of Adam's Jeep. That's where you'll find the colchicine. Think about how strange this is. An anonymous tipster not only knows what killed Mary, they know exactly where physical evidence is located in a specific vehicle. This is either someone with direct knowledge of the crime, or this is the killer themselves trying to frame someone else. Detectives have to follow this lead. Adam Yoder, already devastated by his mother's death, now finds himself as the prime suspect. He agrees to let police search the specific area mentioned in the letter. Maybe he thinks this will clear him. Maybe he's just too grief-stricken to care. The search happens quickly. Under the passenger seat of Adam's Jeep, exactly where the anonymous letter said it would be, investigators find a bottle of colchicine. Next to it, a wrapper and a crumpled receipt from a chemical supply company called Art Chemicals. And on that receipt, an email address containing the name Madame Yoder. The evidence appears damning. Adam's vehicle, Adam's name on the receipt, the murder weapon right where an anonymous source, who somehow knew Mary was poisoned with colchicine before this was public knowledge, said it would be. Adam Yoder is now the focus of a murder investigation into his own mother's death. But investigators aren't stupid. They know that when evidence is this convenient, this perfectly placed, you have to question whether you're looking at a crime scene or a setup. Someone went to the trouble of writing an anonymous letter directing police to physical evidence. Why would the actual killer do that? Why not just stay silent and let the death remain a medical mystery? The investigation shifts. Who wrote the letter? Who had the knowledge, the access, the motive to frame Adam Yoder? Detectives start looking at people close to the family, close to Adam specifically, and one name keeps surfacing: Caitlin Conley. Caitlin was 24 years old in 2015. She worked at Chiropractic Family Care as the office manager, a position she got, according to reports, because Adam helped her land the job. But the professional connection was complicated by a personal one. Caitlin and Adam had dated. Their relationship was described by people who knew them as volatile, on again, off again, the kind of thing that leaves emotional wreckage even after it's officially over. By 2015, they were broken up, but Caitlin still worked at the family business. She was there every day, interacting with Mary, with Bill, with patients. She knew the routines. She had access to Mary's workspace, her belongings, potentially her food. When investigators bring Caitlin in for questioning, they ask her about the anonymous letter. Do you know anything about this? Do you know who might have written it? At first, Caitlin denies any knowledge, but as the interview continues, her story changes. Eventually, she admits something stunning. She wrote the letter herself. She wrote an anonymous letter falsely accusing her ex-boyfriend of murdering his mother and directed police to evidence she allegedly planted in his vehicle. Why would someone do that? The prosecution will eventually argue that this was misdirection, an attempt to frame Adam for a murder Caitlin herself committed. But there are other possible explanations, and Caitlin's defense team will spend years arguing them. What's undeniable is this: Caitlin Conley lied to investigators, and that lie led police directly to evidence in a murder case. DNA testing on the colchicine bottle and wrapper found in Adam's Jeep yielded crucial results. Adam Yoder was excluded as a contributor to the DNA mixture found on the vial. So, whose DNA was it? The major contributor was identified as Caitlin Conley. But prosecutors were building an even more comprehensive case. They alleged that Conley had used falsified documents to purchase the research-grade colchicine. According to court documents, she had created a fake letter of intent and a fraudulent W-9 tax form, using false information to acquire the poison from a chemical supply company. Investigators also discovered that Conley had purchased a prepaid credit card in Adam's name. When they examined the serial number, it matched the receipt found in Adam's Jeep, the one for the colchicine purchase. The picture emerging was one of elaborate planning and deception. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spur-of-the-moment act. This was calculated, methodical, designed not just to kill, but to frame someone else for the murder. And then there was the digital evidence. When investigators obtained Caitlin Conley's cell phone and had it forensically analyzed, they found disturbing evidence. In the phone's user dictionary, a feature that stores words you type frequently, they discovered the words poison and colchicine. The digital forensics also revealed connections between the phone and the email address used to purchase the colchicine. This evidence would prove central to the prosecution's case, but it would also become the source of a legal controversy that continues to this day. The warrant that allowed seizure of the phone specified that it should be returned to the court. Instead, it was delivered directly to a cybersecurity and forensic center for data extraction. The extracted data was then used to further the investigation and to elicit admissions from Conley during questioning. At the time, this seemed like solid police work, but years later, this procedural deviation would have dramatic consequences. In June 2016, nearly a year after Mary Yoder's death, Caitlin Conley was arrested and indicted. The charges included second-degree murder, falsifying business records, forgery, and petty larceny. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman scorned, seeking revenge against her ex-boyfriend's family in the most brutal way possible. The defense maintained Conley's innocence, arguing the evidence was circumstantial and that there were other people who had both motive and opportunity. They pointed to inconsistencies and raised questions about the investigation itself. The first trial in 2017 ended without a verdict. The jury was hung, unable to reach unanimous agreement. It was a devastating outcome for Mary Yoder's family, who desperately wanted closure and justice. But prosecutors weren't giving up. A second trial was held in 2018. This time, the jury reached a verdict, but not the one prosecutors had hoped for. Caitlin Conley was acquitted of second-degree murder. However, she was convicted of first-degree manslaughter, a lesser-included offense. The distinction is important. Murder requires proof of intent to kill. Manslaughter can include reckless behavior that results in death without specific intent to cause it. The jury's mixed verdict suggested they believed Conley was responsible for Mary's death, but weren't convinced beyond reasonable doubt that she had specifically intended to kill her. In 2018, Caitlin Conley was sentenced to 23 years in prison plus 5 years of post-release supervision. At sentencing, Mary's daughters, Liana and Tamarin, made emotional impact statements, urging the judge to impose the maximum sentence. Adam Yoder, still struggling with guilt over bringing Conley into his family's life, expressed intense self-blame. Conley herself maintained her innocence. In a statement to the court, she said, "With all respect to the justice system, I'm innocent." For Mary Yoder's family, it felt like justice had finally been served, even if not perfectly. For Caitlin Conley, it meant decades in prison for a crime she continued to deny committing. But the story was far from over. Appeals are a normal part of the criminal justice system. In 2021, an appellate court affirmed Conley's conviction, seemingly closing the door on further legal challenges. But her legal team wasn't finished. They filed additional motions, focusing on what they argued were fundamental flaws in how evidence had been obtained and used at trial. In 2024, a county court judge denied a motion to vacate the conviction. Again, it seemed like the legal process had run its course. And then, in January 2025, everything changed. The Appellate Division of the New York State Supreme Court issued a stunning ruling. Caitlin Conley's manslaughter conviction was vacated. The legal reasoning centered on ineffective assistance of counsel, specifically, her trial attorney's failure to properly challenge the search and seizure of her cell phone. Remember the phone evidence? The court determined that the phone had not been handled according to the warrant's requirements. The warrant specified the phone should be returned to court, not sent directly to a forensics lab. This procedural violation, and the attorney's failure to properly suppress the evidence derived from it, constituted ineffective assistance of counsel. The court's decision was extraordinary. They didn't just vacate the conviction, they dismissed the count without prejudice, meaning prosecutors could potentially re-present charges to a grand jury. But there was a catch. All the evidence derived from that phone, and any evidence that flowed from it, would likely be inadmissible in any new trial. In February 2025, Caitlin Conley was released from prison. After serving years for a conviction that had been overturned, she walked free. Oneida County District Attorney Todd Carville faced an agonizing decision. Should they retry Caitlin Conley? In public statements, he acknowledged the challenges. Without the cell phone evidence and anything derived from it, would the remaining evidence be enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt? The DNA evidence remained. Conley's admission that she wrote the anonymous letter remained. The alleged falsified documents remained. But the digital evidence, the words poison and colchicine in her user dictionary, the connections to the email used to purchase the poison, all of that could be suppressed. For Mary Yoder's family, the legal reversal was devastating. Liana and Tamarin had believed justice had been served. Adam Yoder had tried to find peace with the conviction. Now, they faced the possibility that Mary's killer might never be held accountable. But what if Caitlin Conley is innocent? What if the conviction was wrong from the start? Those questions, uncomfortable as they are, must also be considered. Conley has consistently maintained her innocence. In interviews and documentary appearances, she has stated clearly, "I did not kill Mary Yoder." Some members of Mary's own extended family have expressed support for Conley, believing she was wrongly convicted. They have pointed to other potential suspects and raised questions about the investigation. So what's the truth? Let's consider what we know as established fact versus what remains disputed. Established facts. Mary Yoder died from colchicine poisoning in July 2015. The death was ruled a homicide. Caitlin Conley wrote an anonymous letter falsely implicating Adam Yoder. Colchicine was found in Adam's Jeep where the letter said it would be. Conley's DNA was the major contributor on the colchicine bottle and wrapper. Conley purchased a prepaid card in Adam's name that matched the receipt for the colchicine. Conley worked at the Yoder family practice and had been romantically involved with Adam. Disputed or uncertain. Conley's intent in writing the anonymous letter, frame job versus other explanation. Whether Conley purchased the colchicine herself or was somehow set up. The reliability of evidence derived from the cell phone search. Whether there were other individuals with motive and opportunity. The exact mechanism by which Mary ingested the colchicine. The DNA evidence is powerful. Finding Conley's DNA on the colchicine vial is deeply incriminating. Her admission that she wrote a letter directing police to evidence she allegedly shouldn't have known about is equally damning. The prepaid card purchase in Adam's name suggests an attempt to frame him. But the cell phone evidence, which might have provided the strongest proof of premeditation and planning, is now legally tainted. Without it, proving intent becomes more difficult, and without clear intent, could a jury convict on murder charges? Behind every crime are real people whose lives are forever altered. Mary Yoder's death didn't just end one life. It shattered a family and a community. Bill Yoder lost his wife and business partner of decades. The practice they built together could never be the same without her. Liana and Tamarin lost their mother and then had to fight through a legal system that would ultimately fail to provide definitive justice. Adam Yoder lost his mother and carries the burden of having introduced the woman accused of killing her into the family's life. At sentencing, Adam expressed what he called self-hatred for bringing Caitlin Conley into their world. That psychological burden, deserved or not, is a weight he'll carry forever. For Caitlin Conley, the path has been equally traumatic. If she's guilty, she's a woman who committed a horrific crime and is now evading justice due to a legal technicality. If she's innocent, she's a woman who spent years in prison for a murder she didn't commit, lost years of her life, and will forever be associated with this crime. And for Mary Yoder's patients and friends, the community that loved her, there's the loss of someone irreplaceable. The kindness, the warmth, the dedication she brought to her work is gone. That void can never be filled. There's a photograph of Mary Yoder taken just days before she died. She's smiling at the camera, relaxed, surrounded by people who loved her. Looking at that photo now, knowing what came next, is almost unbearable, because Mary had no idea. None of us ever do. As I'm telling you this story, the case technically remains open. Prosecutors in Oneida County are weighing whether to retry Caitlin Conley now that her conviction has been vacated. The DNA evidence still exists. The anonymous letter still exists. The prepaid credit card purchased in Adam's name still exists. But the digital evidence, the cell phone data that might have sealed the case, is likely inadmissible now due to how it was obtained. Does that mean justice failed? Or Does it mean the system worked exactly as it should, protecting constitutional rights even when the outcome is painful? Mary Yoder's family deserves answers. They deserve closure. They deserve to know with certainty who poisoned their mother, their wife, their friend. Right now, they don't have that. They have a vacated conviction, a released suspect, and an agonizing wait to see if prosecutors will try again. Caitlin Conley, for her part, maintains she had nothing to do with Mary's death. If she's innocent, and that remains an open question legally, then she spent years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. That's its own tragedy. And if she's guilty, then a carefully planned murder, executed with precision and followed by an elaborate frame job, might ultimately go unpunished because of a procedural error in how evidence was collected. There's no satisfying ending here. No moment of catharsis where justice is clearly served and everyone can move forward. This is the reality of many true crime cases. They're messy, they're unresolved, and they leave more questions than answers. What we know for certain is this. On July 20th, 2015, someone put colchicine into something Mary Yoder consumed. Within 48 hours, she was dead. Her family will never fully recover from that loss. The community of Whitesboro lost a healer and a friend. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened that day. Maybe they're in a cell. Maybe they're walking free. Maybe they're sleeping soundly at night, believing they got away with murder. Or maybe they're tormented by what they did, living with guilt that will never fade. We may never know. But Mary Yoder deserves to be remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived, with compassion, with dedication, with a genuine desire to ease suffering in others. Rest in peace, Dr. Yoder. Your story isn't finished yet, and neither is the search for truth. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. At the Vincent Revival Center in Alabama, the congregation is raising money for Hurricane Katrina victims through a series of weekend turkey shoots. Neighbors gather in the cool fall air. Shotguns fire. Paper targets are hit. Frozen turkeys are handed to the winners. It appears ordinary. A familiar community event in rural Shelby County. Nothing seems out of place. The event is organized by the church's pastor, Timothy Tilman. He is charismatic, well-spoken, respected. To the congregation, he is the moral center of the church. 300 miles away in Mississippi, a woman is planning her wedding. She believes her fiancé is a decorated military veteran, a divorced U.S. Navy SEAL, quiet, confident. Her family has already welcomed him. The wedding date is approaching. That Navy SEAL does not exist. The man she is engaged to marry is Timothy Tilman, the same Timothy Tilman who preaches every Sunday in Alabama, the same man whose wife, Janet Tilman, is at home in the church parsonage. She is raising their daughters, organizing school activities, managing band booster meetings. Janet does not know her husband is living a second life. She does not know he has created another identity, a parallel existence. On October 26th, 4 days after the final turkey shoot, a shotgun discharges inside the parsonage. Janet Tilman is struck once in the back. She does not survive. Timothy Tilman is holding the gun. He will admit that immediately. He will say it was an accident. What follows will occupy investigators, divide two juries, and stretch across nearly a decade of appeals. The question is not who fired the weapon. The question is this: when a man has already lied about his name, his past, his military service, and his marriage, can he be believed when he says he never meant to pull the trigger? Hello, I'm Michael, and this is another Unreal True Crime. Before we go any further into what happened that October night, I need you to understand who Janet Loretta Tilman actually was. Not as a case number, not as a name that appears in appellate court documents. As a human being who lived and breathed and mattered to people. Janet was 40 years old in the fall of 2005. She had spent years building a life in Vincent, a life centered on family, faith, and service to her community. As the wife of the pastor at Vincent Revival Center, she occupied a specific role in that small-town ecosystem. People looked to her as an example. She was expected to embody the values her husband preached from the pulpit every Sunday. But Janet was more than a role. She was more than pastor's wife or devoted mother, though she was certainly both of those things. I spent a long time going through every document I could find about her, trying to piece together who she actually was as a person. Her obituary describes her as a faithful wife and loving mother, the kind of language that appears in thousands of death notices every year. Standard, expected, almost interchangeable. But there were other details that stopped me cold. Janet was deeply involved with the Vincent High School Band Boosters. If you've ever been part of a school community, you know what that means. Band boosters are the parents who show up early and stay late. They're the ones organizing fundraisers, coordinating travel for competitions, making sure every kid has the equipment they need. It's thankless, invisible work, the kind of labor that holds communities together while others take the spotlight. That was Janet, the person in the background making things run. And then there's the detail from her obituary that I keep coming back to. Among all the formal descriptions of her roles and relationships, someone made sure to include 4 simple words. She loved her dog. Think about that for a moment. When you're writing an obituary, you have limited space to capture an entire human life. Every word has to count. And someone, probably a family member, someone who knew her deeply, decided that the world needed to know Janet Tilman found joy in the simple companionship of a pet. That's not a title. That's not a role she played. That's a window into who she actually was when nobody was watching. A woman who loved her dog. A woman who made space in her life for uncomplicated affection. Janet had daughters. She had a home, the church parsonage, connected to the building where her husband preached. Her entire world was built around what she believed were solid foundations: faith, family, community, the man she had married. She had no idea those foundations were hollow. Timothy Dane Tilman occupied one of the most trusted positions in any small community. As pastor of Vincent Revival Center, an Assemblies of God congregation, he wasn't just Janet's husband. He was the spiritual leader for dozens of families who came to him with their deepest fears, their private doubts, their most painful secrets. He baptized their children. He presided over their weddings. He held their hands at funerals and told them their loved ones were in a better place. He counseled married couples through rough patches. He guided teenagers struggling with their faith. In documentary descriptions of this case, Timothy is referred to as the beating heart of his community, and by all accounts, that's exactly how people saw him: charismatic, dedicated, a man who had devoted his life to God's work. The Tilmans lived in the church parsonage, a house provided specifically for the pastor and his family, adjacent to the church building itself. Their lives were completely intertwined with the institution. Timothy's income came from the church. Their housing was church property. Their social world revolved around the congregation. To understand what comes later, you need to understand what was at stake for Timothy Tilman if his marriage fell apart. In 2005, in a conservative Assemblies of God congregation in rural Alabama, a divorced pastor typically couldn't remain in his position. The denomination had strict views on marriage and divorce. If Timothy and Janet separated, he wouldn't just lose his wife, he would lose his job, his home, his income, his identity, his standing in the only community he knew, everything. And something else was happening that fall. The church had begun the process of conducting a background check on their pastor. It was becoming standard practice in religious institutions, a response to scandals that had plagued other denominations. Nothing unusual about it, unless you had built your entire life on fabrications. Court records would later reveal that Timothy had, at some point, changed his name, created a second identity, and using that alternate persona, he had been living an entirely separate life. In Mississippi, 300 miles from Vincent, Timothy Tilman had presented himself as something he absolutely was not: a divorced U.S. Navy SEAL, a decorated military officer, a hero. The woman he was engaged to believed every word. Her family had welcomed him. They saw a quiet, confident man with a distinguished past and a bright future. They had no reason to question his story. Why would anyone lie about something like that? I've researched dozens of cases involving deception over the years: con artists who steal money, fraudsters who fake credentials, people who lie their way into jobs or relationships. But there's something uniquely disturbing about what Timothy was doing. This wasn't a grifter working a scam and moving on. This was a man standing at a pulpit every Sunday, delivering sermons about truth and morality and the importance of living a godly life, while simultaneously maintaining a fabricated romance under a stolen valor identity. The cognitive compartmentalization required to do that is almost impossible to comprehend. By October 2005, Timothy Tilman was running out of runway. The background check was coming. The wedding in Mississippi was approaching. Janet was still very much present, very much his wife, very much an obstacle to the fantasy he was building elsewhere. Something had to give. September 2005. Hurricane Katrina had just devastated the Gulf Coast, leaving communities across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama in ruins. Like congregations throughout the South, Vincent Revival Center was looking for ways to help. Pastor Timothy Tilman proposed a series of Saturday turkey shoots throughout October. The dates were set: October 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th. All proceeds would go to hurricane relief. If you're not from the rural South, turkey shoots might need some explanation. Despite the name, no actual turkeys are involved in the shooting. Participants pay an entry fee and compete in target shooting, usually with shotguns at paper targets. The winners take home prizes, often frozen turkeys, hence the name. It's a fundraising tradition that goes back generations, the kind of community event that brings people together around shared skills and shared values. Timothy threw himself into organizing the events. The pastor coordinating charity work, rallying his congregation for a good cause, bringing the community together during a time of regional crisis. From the outside, it was another example of his dedication to service. The first turkey shoot on October 8th went smoothly. The second on October 15th, the same. By the third event on October 22nd, the fundraiser had become a genuine community success. At the end of each turkey shoot, the firearms were collected and checked. This was standard protocol, basic gun safety that anyone familiar with firearms would recognize. You don't leave loaded weapons lying around. You verify each gun is empty before storing it. Church members would later testify that the guns were checked after the October 22nd event. But there was one issue. One of the shotguns was jammed. It couldn't be cycled properly to verify it was clear. All the firearms were gathered up and placed in the trunk of Timothy Tilman's vehicle. He would be responsible for them until the final turkey shoot on October 29th. The gun sat in his trunk through Sunday, through Monday, through Tuesday, Wednesday, October 26th, 4 days before the final fundraiser. Janet was at the parsonage. Timothy was home. The shotguns from Saturday's charity event were somewhere in the house or nearby. The final turkey shoot would never happen. By the end of that Wednesday night, Janet Tilman would be dead, and everything Vincent Revival Center believed about their pastor would begin to unravel. Janet Loretta Tilman died on October 26, 2005. The cause was a shotgun blast to her back. Timothy Tilman was the one who called for help, and from the very first moment, he admitted one crucial fact: he was holding the gun when it fired. His explanation was that it was a tragic accident. According to his account, he was carrying multiple shotguns, the ones from the turkey shoot fundraiser, and one of them discharged while he was adjusting his grip. A horrible mistake, an unforeseeable tragedy. Here's what made this case unusual from the very beginning. The central question was never about who did it. Timothy admitted he was holding the weapon. There was no mystery about whose finger was on the trigger. The question, the thing that would tear this community apart, fuel 2 separate trials, and consume nearly a decade of legal proceedings, was whether he meant to fire. Investigators started pulling at threads, and the more they pulled, the stranger things got. The shotguns had been checked after the October 22nd turkey shoot. Church members testified this was standard procedure. Guns were verified empty before being stored. So why would one suddenly be loaded 4 days later? Why was Timothy handling the guns at all on a Wednesday evening? The final turkey shoot wasn't until Saturday. What reason was there to move them, adjust them, carry multiple shotguns through the parsonage? And then the other life came crashing into the investigation. The fiancé in Mississippi, the fabricated military background, the alternate identity, the wedding that was supposed to happen, a wedding that couldn't happen as long as Timothy was still married. Suddenly, what had looked like a tragic accident started to look like something else entirely. Prosecutors began building a theory. Here was a man with a secret life he desperately needed to protect. A wife whose existence was an obstacle. A position, pastor, husband, community pillar, that would crumble completely the moment the truth emerged. The background check the church was pursuing. The divorce that would have destroyed his career and taken his home. The exposure that was coming whether he wanted it or not. Timothy Tilman had motive. He had opportunity. He had sole control of the weapons. Accident? Or solution to an impossible problem? January 31, 2006. 3 months after Janet's death. A check for $5,000 was deposited into the Tilman's bank account. It was one of those unsolicited loan offers that financial companies mail out, essentially pre-approved credit that you can activate simply by signing and depositing the check. This particular check was made out to Janet Tilman. It arrived at the house addressed to her, as so many pieces of mail probably still did, and it bore what appeared to be her signature on the endorsement line. Janet, who had been dead for 90 days. When investigators confronted Timothy about the deposit, he admitted the truth. He had forged his dead wife's signature. His explanation was that he needed money for expenses. The headstone, household bills, the kinds of costs that pile up when you're suddenly managing everything alone. Now, I want to be clear about something. Forging a deceased person's signature on a financial document is illegal regardless of the circumstances, regardless of what you need the money for, regardless of whether you think you're entitled to it. But what struck me about this, what I keep thinking about, isn't just the crime itself. It's what it revealed about Timothy Tilman's relationship with truth. This was a man who had already constructed an elaborate alternate identity, who had convinced a woman and her entire family that he was a decorated Navy SEAL, who had maintained parallel lives for months or years without detection, who had looked his congregation in the eye every Sunday while living a complete fabrication. And now, 3 months after his wife's death, during what must have still been an active investigation, he was forging her signature on a check. Did he really think nobody would notice? A financial transaction in a dead woman's name, deposited to a shared account while investigators were still looking at the circumstances of her death. The arrogance is staggering. Or maybe it's desperation. Maybe it's both. For prosecutors, this forgery became a crucial piece of evidence, not because of the $5,000, but because of what it demonstrated about character. Here was documented proof that Timothy Tilman could assess a situation, decide that deception was the answer, and execute that deception without apparent hesitation. If he could forge a signature 3 months after the fact, what else was he capable of faking? The legal battle that followed wasn't about proving Timothy Tilman pulled the trigger. He had already admitted that. It was about what was happening inside his mind when he did. The defense strategy centered on accident. They brought in Lawden Yates, a firearms expert who testified that the shotgun could have discharged unintentionally. Yates explained how someone might mistakenly believe a gun was unloaded even after checking, especially with a weapon that had been jammed. He discussed how safeties can fail, how triggers can catch, how tragic accidents happen even to experienced handlers. On paper, it was a reasonable defense. Guns do sometimes go off accidentally. People do make mistakes. The physical evidence couldn't definitively prove intent. But the prosecution had something more powerful than ballistics. They had Timothy's pattern, the fabricated identity, the Navy SEAL fiction, the engagement to another woman under a name that wasn't his, the forged check 3 months later. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture. A man who had made deception his default mode of operation. And then there was Kelly Blansett. Blansett had been incarcerated at the same facility as Timothy at some point during the legal process. He came forward with explosive testimony. According to Blansett, Timothy had admitted to him directly that the shooting wasn't an accident. Jailhouse informant testimony is always complicated. Defense attorneys know that people in custody have enormous incentive to provide information prosecutors want to hear. It can mean reduced sentences, better conditions, favorable treatment. Timothy's lawyers fought back hard on this point. They called Johnny Cups to the stand. Cups testified that Kelly Blansett did not have a reputation for truthfulness. The defense argument was clear. You can't trust this witness. He's lying for his own benefit. It became a credibility battle within a credibility battle. Which liar do you believe? What I find interesting about the prosecution's overall strategy is how they framed the core question for the jury. They weren't just asking whether Timothy planned to kill Janet on that specific night. They were asking the jury to consider the totality of who Timothy Tilman had proven himself to be. A man who could stand before a congregation and preach about morality while secretly engaged to another woman. A man who could maintain parallel lives so completely that neither world suspected the other existed. A man who could forge his dead wife's signature without hesitation. Could you really believe anything he said? The prosecution's argument distilled to its essence. Timothy Tilman had proven he was capable of sustained, elaborate deception. The accident story was just another performance from a man who had been performing his entire adult life. In 2009, a Shelby County jury found Timothy Dane Tilman guilty of murder. Prosecutor Roger Hepburn had laid out the case methodically: the double life, the motive, the opportunity, the pattern of deception. In his closing arguments, he described Tilman as a sick man who had planned his wife's death. Defense attorney Erskine Mathis countered that whatever his client's personal failings, whatever lies he had told, he had not committed murder. Janet's death was a tragedy, not a crime. The jury sided with the prosecution. Guilty. But this case was far from over. In 2011, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals did something that surprised many observers. They threw out the conviction and ordered a new trial. The reason had nothing to do with whether Timothy was actually innocent. It was about trial procedure. The original court had combined the murder charge with the check forgery charge, letting the jury hear both cases together in a single trial. The appeals court ruled this was improper consolidation. Evidence from the forgery, which happened 3 months after Janet's death, could have unfairly prejudiced jurors on the murder charge. The two events were separate. They should have been tried separately. I actually think this shows the legal system working the way it's supposed to, even though I know that might be a frustrating take for some people. The appeals court wasn't saying Timothy was innocent. They weren't saying the jury got it wrong. They were saying that the process matters, that even someone accused of terrible things deserves a fair trial that follows the rules. In 2012, Timothy Tilman faced a second jury, different courtroom, different proceedings, same central question: did he intend to kill his wife? The verdict was identical: guilty of murder. Timothy Dane Tilman was sentenced to life in prison. The appeals continued for years afterward. His direct appeal was finalized on March 14, 2014. He filed a Rule 32 petition in February 2015, claiming ineffective assistance of counsel and raising other procedural issues. The Alabama Supreme Court denied his final writ on March 16, 2018, without even issuing a written opinion. As of the most recent records I could find, Timothy Tilman remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence for the murder of Janet. Do I think the sentence fits? Honestly, I've wrestled with that question. Life in prison for a case built entirely on intent, where the physical act itself was never disputed, where the key evidence was largely circumstantial. But two separate juries, presented with the evidence twice, reached the same conclusion independently. And when I consider the totality of who Timothy showed himself to be, the systematic deceptions, the callous forgery, the complete disregard for truth as a concept, I understand why they decided the way they did. This case has stayed with me longer than most. I keep thinking about the architecture of Timothy's deception, not just the lies themselves, Those are almost banal in their ambition, but the infrastructure required to maintain them, the separate phone calls that had to be managed, the different stories for different audiences, the complete alternate identity sustained over months or years, the mental compartmentalization required to stand at a pulpit preaching about honesty while living the exact opposite. How does someone do that? How does a person look their wife in the eye every morning, kiss their children goodbye, lead a congregation in prayer, and then drive 300 miles to inhabit a completely fabricated version of themselves? I don't have an answer. I'm not sure there is one that makes sense. And I keep thinking about Janet. She built her life on what she believed was solid ground: faith, family, community. The church where her husband preached, and the parsonage where they raised their daughters. She had no reason to question any of it. Why would she? The man she married was a pastor. He counseled other couples. He was supposed to be the moral center of their community. How do you even begin to process discovering that someone you trusted completely was lying about everything? Janet never got the chance to process it. She never knew the extent of the deception. She died believing in a life that was, in some fundamental way, a fiction. The congregation at Vincent Revival Center had to rebuild after this tragedy, not just structurally or organizationally, but spiritually. An Assemblies of God report from 2018 described how the community was rocked by what happened. The betrayal wasn't just one family's trauma, it was an institutional crisis. The man they had trusted with their souls had been deceiving them at the most fundamental level. This reminds me of other cases I've researched involving double lives, people who maintained completely separate realities for years without anyone catching on. But those cases usually involve strangers, brief encounters, people who exist on the periphery of each other's lives. This was a wife, a partner, someone who shared Timothy's bed and his breakfast table and his life in the parsonage. The intimacy of the deception makes it so much worse. Janet Loretta Tilman was 40 years old. She organized band booster events and made sure other people's children had what they needed. She loved her dog. She believed in her community, her faith, her family. She deserved to grow old, to see her daughters build their own lives, to someday learn the truth on her own terms and decide for herself what to do with it. Instead, she became a case file, evidence exhibits, appellate citations. But she was a person first, and if nothing else from this story stays with you, I hope that does. If this case raised questions for you about the evidence, about the double life, about how someone can deceive the people closest to them so completely, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what stuck with you, what you're still thinking about. These conversations are a huge part of why I keep doing this work. Until next time. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.